so we can start gaining ground in our lives, right? One of the first things that we need to do is self-reflection. And I think one of the most important steps we can have is honesty and self-critique. And a lot of us think that we're doing this, and a lot of us are just lying to ourselves, right? And it goes back into some of the discussions that you guys have heard us talk about before with Shannon and I talking about destroying the image bearer and the spiritual warfare, right? So if you're not really, and this is a slippery slope to go into, because what can happen is, just like, again, we're here at the Protector Summit, so we're teaching how to be protectors, and when we have that balance of, you can come so overly protective that you're paranoid, right? So we want to have good situational awareness. We want to be prepared. We want to be capable, but we don't want it to consume our lives so much that there's no joy left. And we can't appreciate those moments. You can't appreciate going out to dinner with your girlfriend because you're so paranoid about the what if this goes. Yeah, you know what I mean? So again, like the original conversation we had, we have to find balance. But we have to understand that there is an enemy there. So when we start looking at the spiritual warfare stuff and how the attacks come in, one, we have to acknowledge that there is an attacker, right? Which would be the devil and his army, and how does the devil work through people to attack us, right? Indirectly, and how the devil works through us. We think that doesn't happen. How the devil works through us, right? To attack others. Do you ever have a response to someone where, like, you're in a bad mood or something's going on and they do something that's this big and you react like this big and you say some shit that you would normally never say, and it's like, whoa, where'd that come from? Who spoke that? You know what I mean? Like, whose tool are you at that moment? Who's speaking through you? Because if those aren't your words, then whose words are they? And at other times you might say something, you know, super wonderful. You might be at the right place at the right time and really help someone, right? And who's working through you in those moments? And we start to identify, right, who's working with me when. And in that self-reflection, right, and in that time of honesty, it's super important, right? Because right now, here's a super easy example, really obvious example. The country is in divide over this whole thing with the transgender movement and the over-sexualization of our children, and then bringing the sexualization into our schools and manipulating and taking advantage of our children, right? We all agree that trying to change the sex and over, like, to do sex changes on children, would we agree that that's wrong? Yeah, right? So why is it wrong? Have we asked ourselves, why is it wrong to want to change the sex of the children and to over-sexualize children? Why do we find that to be wrong? You're putting your ideals onto someone else, you're taking their choice away, they don't understand. You're destroying the image of God. Okay, so we go into, right, in Genesis it says that God created us in His image. And it also says that the devil was cast out with 1/3 of all the angels, right, for trying to have equal power to God. And obviously he doesn't. They get cast out. And the devil, as we spoke about, is now stuck on the world, right, and is crawling across the world looking to steal, seek, destroy, right? And if he can't destroy God, what can he do? God made us in His image, right, or in their image, right? And probably referring to the Trinity, right? But in any case, here you have the angels who are like, what do you mean you're creating them in your image and not in, like, how are you putting these people with more authority than you're giving us? Like, how are you, building this thing you've created up onto such a golden pedestal, right?
Free will. He gave us free will.
And he gave us free will, and they don't have it, right? So there's like jealousy there, I would imagine. You know what I mean? And now, if God can't destroy, if the devil can't destroy God, then what he's going to do is he's going to attack, right, the thing that God cherishes, the thing that's in his likeness, right, us, the image bearer, right? When you have this stuff happening with the cartels, and the cartels want to make a statement, and you do something bad, what do they threaten the cartels? What do they threaten? Your family. You might be really tough. You might not care if you die. They understand that. Cool, we're going to attack your family. And you know what? We're going to attack them right in front of you. We're going to tie you to a chair, and we're going to skin your family alive. We're going to do horrible atrocities to your family right in front of you, right? Why? Because that's how we hurt you. We destroy the ones you love. So when we talk about this in the context of manipulating children and sex changes on children and all this kind of stuff, it's like, oh yeah, that's super obvious. Where it's not so obvious, because we're all full of shit and we're not honest with ourselves, me included, right, is what's happening with all these women out there getting breast implants and lip injections, and maybe hair extensions aren't that bad because it's not a permanent thing. You know what I mean? Right? But they're changing their image. And a lot of guys look at that and they're like, oh man, these women are so vain. Look at all the stuff they're doing, right? Meanwhile, guys are getting covered in tattoos. Does it make sense? And we're changing our image by covering ourselves in ink, right? And why do we get tattoos? What's the reason a dude gets a tattoo?
Old school.
To look cool, right? Maybe they think that it's going to change the perception of how people look at them. I remember when I was getting tattoos, and this isn't about me, but like when I was getting tattoos at, 19 to 25 years old in the SEAL teams. You guys ever see the movie The Red Dragon? Yeah. It's like the play off the Hannibal. Remember he was getting his back covered in the tattoo and he was becoming the monster?
Oh, yeah.
Right? He was becoming the Red Dragon, right? I'm not a serial killer, right? But in my mind, right? When I was getting tattoos, to me, I was like, as I was becoming further in the process of the SEAL teams and becoming like further of a kinetic warrior, right? I was separated. I wasn't following Christ at the time, right? I was agnostic, probably, fair enough to say. I had a little bit of a string holding me to spirituality, right? I had a little bit of discernment of right from wrong on bigger principles, right? But I wasn't following Christ. And when I was getting tattoos, I was like, when people see me, I am going to be more intimidating, right? In my mind, I was becoming a war weapon, right? I was building my body for battle. And those tattoos symbolized like a visual armor or a type of intimidation. It was part of an external representation of what I was feeling internally. Does that make sense? Yeah. When I later on came to Christ, and then I had people who were offering me more tattoos in trade for firearms training, right? And I was really like tempted to do it. And they're like, yeah, man, I'll trade you for the training or whatever. I'll come up, I'll bring my gun or whatever. And I just started thinking, like, what would I get a tattoo of? Right now that I'm having a relationship with Christ, what am I going to tattoo on my body? And as I started looking into this, and I'm like, every idea I had was counterintuitive to what Christ would ask of me. Does that make sense? And then we start looking into, as our body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, well, how are we treating it? You know what I mean? And it's not about the breast implants, the lip injections, the tattoos, the piercings. That's not the point. The point is, There's someone speaking into us, or there's something speaking into us saying that we're not good enough the way we are. That if I just change my appearance, my life will change. Why is the suicide rate so high with these people getting these transgender sex changes? Because they think that's going to solve the problem, and then it doesn't, and now they've hit rock bottom and they don't know what to do. Right? That's not who's... They still feel the same, if not worse, because now they've been duped and they can't undo it.
It's like those hormones fucking up their...
Yeah, there's a lot to it. So that's the physical, the kinetic, the worldly is the hormones, this, that, right? Behind the scenes is the spiritual warfare. Someone is speaking into your mind, speaking into your heart that makes you feel a certain way, that makes you think that you need to start changing yourself, right? To make yourself more desirable or loved by the world, not by God. God never has said to anyone, I think you just need to get a couple injections, do a couple little tucks and cuts and this and that, and you know, I got a place for you right here. You know what I mean? Like, God never said that. So who's telling you that?
It's all man-made.
It's all man-made. Whose approval are you seeking? Others, not God's in that. Does that make sense? So with that, what God actually says is, before you were born, I knew you. When you were in the womb, I knew you. And I made you in my image. Does that make sense? Right? So, coming back into this, we're so easy to go, yeah, transgender sex changes on kids is bad. My tattoos aren't a big deal. Transgender sex changes on kids are bad. My lip injections are good. Does that make sense? And if we lie to ourselves and we don't connect the dots there, right, then where else are we missing the mark in our honest self-reflection in those other areas of my life? Does that make sense? Yeah. If I'm lying to myself in the one area, there's a high probability I'm lying to myself in the other areas. And we might start to acknowledge it, right? Well, like Maddie was saying, we erased the board, we go into repentance, right? And there's a lot of people who acknowledge the stuff, but then they continue to do it, right? And is that true repentance if we continue to do, like, are you actually sorry if you continue, if I smack you in the back of the head and go, sorry about that, and then I do it again, was I actually sorry? You know what I mean? Like, maybe the first time was an accident, right? But you start doing it 2, 3, 4, 5 times, is it really an accident? Right? So, not to throw this out there necessarily, I just use that example because it's right in front of our faces and it's super obvious. You know what I mean? And it's just a very obvious example, and there's a very big, when the ball's in our court, we'll come up with lots of reasons and rationale to why it's okay. I love this saying where it's like, we judge others on their actions and ourselves on our intentions. You know what I mean? So it's very easy for us to be like, oh yeah, so-and-so, so. But when I do it, well, you don't understand my situation because I got a pretty good reason for why I'm doing this or that. You know what I mean? And we try to explain it away. But as we move forward, I would just use that as a quick example to just start looking and going, first, who is speaking that into my mind? In any of those areas that Maddie was talking about, who's speaking into me? And when I hear the words in my self-talk, is that my words? Is that the devil's words? Or is that God's words? And God's words are going to come in the forth of truth and principle. The devil words are going to come in the form of, am I self-idolizing? Right? Am I looking for the get rich quick? Am I being impatient? Right? This is the shortcut. This is the false promise, you know, of great things. You know what I mean? But it's a trap. There's lots of ways to get money fast or to get fame fast or whatever, but a lot of times it comes at a trap. You know what I mean? There's lots of women right now who can do an OnlyFans and become famous in a couple of months and make a lot of money. Is that a trap? Do you think there's going to be fulfillment in that? Right? It's a trap, right? There's a lot of dudes who sell drugs and do all sorts of stuff like that. They make a lot of money, but there's no security in their lifestyle. Those are the big, like, obvious ones. But then when you start looking into the micro things, like the little decisions we do on a daily basis, right? The little things, it still applies who is speaking into us. Because what the devil will do, just like when we talked about when we take a bad habit and we try to get rid of it and we try to replace it with a good habit, if we don't, every time something good happens, right? If we build an ego, right? We're talking about like what was coveting. If our friend gets something great and we're like, man, I wish I had that, right? Or there's there's an ounce of jealousy. If we don't check that and be honest with ourselves, right? That's where the devil looks to come in and create that little stronghold, right? And once it throws that little hook in, right? How it's going to work is you have the devil's going to come and he's going to give you temptation, right? And then the devil comes into the garden and he gives you temptation, right? Once he tempts you with it, you're like, I don't know. You know, God said not to, but, right? And then they'll try to justify. Yeah, but he doesn't want you to do that just because he doesn't want you to know what he knows. You know, he doesn't want you to be like him. He wants to kind of keep you down. If you do have that, you'll be more like him. And that's why, you know what I mean? So now there's like this little dialogue, this dance that you do, you know what I mean? Right? And then what happens is you come to terms and you make an agreement. And once you make an agreement, right? You know what? I will take a bite, right? Then the devil comes in and he goes with the attack. I can't believe you did that. You are such a piece of shit. If anyone knows what you did, right? They're not going to want to talk to you. You got to keep this a secret, right? Man, you are so weak. And then what happens then comes in the shame and the guilt, right? And now the shame and the guilt, right, makes you retract. And that's at the point what happened to Adam and Eve after the apple. They hid from God. And what happens is, again, now you have separation. There's this void between you and God that God didn't put there, your decisions did. And now because of your guilt, you keep the distance back. Does that make sense?
You're afraid to go back.
You're afraid to go back because of the shame.
Yeah.
You know that what you did was wrong, so your shame makes you step back. God didn't step back, you step back.
Because originally they were naked and they didn't care.
Exactly. All the animals are naked and they don't care. We're different than the animals, but at the beginning there was no clothes. But that's just how this thing. So these little tiny, right? We call these the strongholds, right? The devil gets strongholds, and you think of it like a string with a hook on it. He's just like throwing these things like he's fishing, right? Just throwing these temptations, throwing these little things out, and then he gets you with one, boom, one little hook. But that one little hook now leads to another. Does that make sense? Because now what happens is, because of shame and guilt, when you get around your other friends or family, what might you start doing to cover it up?
Pull them into it.
What's that?
Pull them into the same thing.
You could pull them into the same thing, or so that would be for them to build, that is like misery loves company. I'm going to try to convince you, like, I don't want to drink alone. Why don't you have a drink with me? Right? That's masking my guilt and shame by groupthink. I'm going to use, if we're all doing it, it's probably not wrong. Does it make sense? But the other thing that we start doing is we may start lying. And now, is lying, is that of God or is that of the devil? Of the devil. Boom, got one more hook. So now I did an act, now I'm covering it up, right? So now I have two hooks. And although it was just a little thing, right, that now sets me in the position I have two hooks. Is it easier if I can't move completely freely? Is it easier to get one hook in, another one? And before you know it, you have this downward spiral. You talk about people's lives spiraling out of control. How does that happen? Because you get this negative momentum, right, until you hit rock bottom and someone either is done, and then what happens is when they come to Christ and they have this like, whoa, I'm like reborn, the act of that is cutting all those ropes, and you're coming in with that machete and you're just cutting all those ropes to free yourself from that bondage, right? But that stuff happens one, through our decision process, but going back to the original, thought of this short talk is just, if I can't be honest with myself, then I'm gonna say, no man, I'm good. When your buddy's like, hey dude, you got a couple of hooks on you? Is there a couple of strings? Are you being locked up in bondage? You're like, nah man, nah, that's good. That's nothing. You know what I mean?
You're not living in truth.
You're not being truthful. So if we're not living in truth, again, if we don't understand how, right, the devil is attacking us, then how can we possibly have a counteroffense, right, or a counterattack to the war that's being waged on us, whether we like it or not? Because we are the battlefield between the devil and God is waging in us, right? So it has nothing to do with us, it has to do with them. But we're the tool, we're the location of the battle. Does that make sense? So in that, as we start identifying that, and for me coming from like a military background, for you guys coming from a fighting background, whatever it is, martial arts or whatever, this is understanding the spiritual warfare in this way just helps me visualize that battlefield, and it makes it way easier for my discernment between what I should and shouldn't be doing. And then when I have these thoughts, I go, well, what does it actually say? And then I jump back in and check and go, where is it in the Bible? Where's the truth in this, right? And it can basically guide you in the process of, well, who's actually speaking into my life right now? You go to Alcoholics Anonymous. If you walk in and they're like, hi, you're like, hi, I'm Mike, I'm an alcoholic. Hi, I'm Jordan, I'm an alcoholic. It is my turn. I'm like, yeah, my name's Rich. I don't really have a problem. I just have to come here because, the court ordered me to come to this stupid class. Like, am I in a position to heal? No.
But you have to be ready to as well.
You have to be ready to.
Right? That's the
right?
repentance.
Exactly. So, but if I can't even acknowledge that the problem's there, we're not getting any headway. From that, if I don't understand how the attack is coming at me, then I can't truly fight it, right? And then moving forward, if I'm so focused on the fight that I forget about God's love, then what happens is it's basically how you guys do in the Sistema and the judo and all that stuff. Oh, you want to do one move? That's cool. I'm going to ride your momentum. Boom, and I'm going to take you with it. So if we don't have the balance like we talked about in the very beginning, then what happens is my energy to fight the devil, right? Unconditionally, we become what we hate if we don't have the Christ and we don't have that balance. Because in my process of fighting the devil, there's a very slippery slope of then riding, he's just going to ride that momentum and make me into the devil. Does that make sense? Right? So,
What's an example of that?
what's an example of that?
Yeah.
Good.
Christ himself did not fight the devil when he was being tempted. He used scripture, God's living word, right? Man shall not live by bread alone. So even Christ, God himself, did not fight in that physical. We fight against the spiritual, right? The wrestling, it's a spiritual battle. It's on that inside of you, right? So that's the battlefront you need. It's not physical, right? You're a three-part being. Your physical, your spirit, and your soul. All three are very important, and it's easy to exercise one. We tend to leave the other two out of it. That's actually the battlefield, your spirit and your soul. And you know how much you fail physically, so imagine how much you fail spiritually and in your soul.
Christ said,
Yeah.
what good does it do a man to gain the world if he loses his soul?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
It's cast into hell.
Yeah.
So,
So an example of that is, like, I'll give you an example for me, right? And if someone did something bad to Anna or Lily, right? My wife or daughter, my first response would be, I'm gonna smash your fucking head in, tie your feet to a rope, and drag your ass down the fucking street behind my truck. And I'm gonna hit every fucking pothole, until there's just feet on a rope. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's not what God would have me do. That would be the devil taking advantage of my ability, right, or my emotion to take a situation that's completely tragic and use that to take me and overcompensate, like we were talking in the beginning, right?
Yeah.
I'm overcompensating. And now through that overcompensation, I'm acting off of emotional response, right? I'm seeking revenge. Does that make sense? There's one thing if I'm in an active process of self-defense and I do something in the moment, right? And I act in self-defense and I stop a bad guy from attacking us and I return with lethal force. In the 10 Commandments, it says, it reads as thou shalt not kill, but going back to like original meanings, it says thou shalt not murder. Murder is not considered self-defense. Me grabbing a dude who did something bad, beating the shit out of him, dragging him over, tying his feet to a rope, and dragging him behind my truck, is that self-defense at this point? No, right? So that's excessive force. You know what I mean?
Big difference.
And in my mind, again, going back to, we judge others by their actions and us by our intentions. And I'm like, yeah, but you don't understand what he did to me. You don't know how much that hurt and what he did to them. This motherfucker deserves it, right? That's what's the internal dialogue that's going on, and you have to check that. I know this is an extreme example, but like,
every man that's a warrior that has children.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel you, Rich, because
But if you-
I tell my wife
yeah.
the same thing. Let someone, because I'll go crazy, and God willing, I won't. But
yeah,
But the point is of that though is that sin happened, and then it's going to create an even worse thing within yourself, because if you
exactly.
that sin of revenge, that's going to make you go in a downward spiral. as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now the devil did the judo. I'm gonna ride the wave and up. Yep, there you go. Maddie?
Can I kind of bounce off that with like
Yeah.
the emotional thing? So like the example I was giving in my talk with the busyness, the emotion that I was dealing with wasn't anger or revenge or anything. It was fear. At the time, one of the biggest contract we had, my largest source of how I pay my bills was going out of business because you're contracting out of this range that was basically not doing so hot, right? So in that moment, the fear of me losing my business that I had worked so hard to build and the mission that I had worked so hard to produce, out of fear, I started seeking other sources outside of God. I was like, who can give me information to make sure my business is stable during this difficult time? So I started seeking coaches and like information and YouTube and all these things, not really recognizing that I was necessarily going outside of God's will because it was kind of a natural response. But at that time, I was acting out of fear. And not that this exactly relates, but you think about, why did Eve eat the apple in the garden? Because she wanted hidden knowledge that she wasn't able to access, right? Same thing, I hired a business coach because I wanted knowledge that I wasn't able to access. Whereas I should have been hunkering down and praying and figuring out what God wanted me to do, instead of trying to take the action into my own hands and do something that was probably outside of God's will. And it steered me down a complete rabbit hole, right? But luckily, because of the people I surrounded myself with, they were able to help me recognize that a lot sooner. Because a lot of us in this room are probably very type A, like ambitious people that constantly want to be succeeding and doing these great things. Sometimes that's not always what God wants. Sometimes He just wants you to rest in Him, right? So that's just another example of how subtly the devil can kind of get those hooks in, like Kurt was saying. And you might not even realize they're hooks. You might think you're doing something the right way, right?
Just trying to power through it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And a lot of times it's a constant process of self-reflection, because a lot of times on the way to success, right, you're doing good, then your head gets big, other people get attached to what you're doing, manipulation comes in, you know, like you look at, again, just obvious examples. Tiger Woods, the best golfer in history. His empire didn't collapse because he got bad at playing golf. It was because he was committing adultery with like 100 women while he was traveling. Does that make sense? So it's this little detail thing. So a lot of times as we're focusing on the whatever it is we're passionate about, right? we have to keep these other aspects of our lives in check, and be honest with ourselves when we're coming across these things, because the fight, you're going to find the kink in the armor. If there's a wall, you try to find the kink in the armor of the wall to make entry. So it might not be like, okay, if we need to take out the best golfer, maybe it's not through like the devil necessarily can't injure your knee. Like if you tweak your knee, that's not necessarily a God or devil thing necessarily. You know what I mean? That's could just be a life thing. It could just be a circumstance, right? But when you start getting challenges of the heart, right? That's where we have to start looking and going back into what is it, what fruit will this bear when I make these decisions, and who's speaking into me, who's tempting me right now. And so anyway, that's just something for us to consider, you know what I mean, when we're talking about the spiritual warfare stuff and whatnot. And again, it applies to any aspect for each one of us in our lives and our circumstances and whatnot. It's going to come in different forms. And then as you overcome one, the attack's going to regroup and attack, just like we were talking about tactics the other day. We're going to go back here to the shoot house in a minute. Cool. We used to do dynamic room entries. Bad guys eventually catch on that we do dynamic room entries, so they build a machine gun nest inside the room. And then what happens is you go to come in and you do a dynamic room entry into the room. There's a machine gun nest right there. They shoot everyone who comes in. Okay, so then the tactics change. So what happens is, instead of coming directly into the room, you stack up on the wall and you start to slow pan. Cool. Okay, once they figure out your tactics are standing on the wall, then they shoot you through the wall or put explosives in the walls and blow you up in the hallway. Okay, so standing in front of the door is not a good idea anymore. Okay, we're going to do wall breach charges. And on the other wall, we're just going to blow a hole in the wall because no one's watching it, and we're going to come in. Does that make sense? So every time you come up with a solution and you beat the one battle, the enemy in the kinetic form and the enemy in the spiritual form is going to go, okay, so that's how we're playing now. Cool. I'm going to formulate a new game plan. And then what happens is when they try to come and attack, you're like, whoop, I got you. I saw what you were doing. I dodged that bullet. This is what I'm doing. I'm looking in truth, and in truth here, okay, I'm not going to fall into that temptation, right? Then just as we have readdressed our game plan, the enemy is going to do the same thing. And that's just the nature of warfare. Does that make sense?
To that point, Rich, what he said earlier about being as wise as serpents but harmless as doves. If you've ever seen Catch Me If You Can, the guy says, I don't waste my time studying all the counterfeits. I just know the truth, and that's all I study, because I can immediately look at it and it's not. So study what's right,
and you'll know exactly what's wrong.
Exactly what's wrong.
Great point.
So,
awesome.